Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the solo mode for Tidal Blades from designers Tim and Ben Eisner and publisher Druid City Games. Tidal Blades is a worker placement game where you are using upgradable dice to complete various challenges. I'm going to head over to the table, I'm going to show you some of the differences between the solo game and the multiplayer game, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so for the purposes of this solo review, I don't have a full setup here. I've got many of the components for the deluxe edition of the game, but not everything. I really have the things out that I think are pertinent to the changes that take place in the solo game versus the multiplayer game. As far as component changes, there are just a few. Number one, this solo player board here, the opposite side of this is for the two-player game. This is for the solo game. You've got this little rival token that's going to add an extra action that the rival can take every round, and this small deck of plot effect cards. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a moment. For the purposes of setup, a couple of things change. Number one is you pick your character, and in this case I chose Axel as my main character. I've got my starting character card here, my shell upgrade. I don't have the starting components because this is just, again, for purposes of illustration. I choose a rival. In this case, I chose Cayman as my rival. And you choose two allies. In this case, I chose Dust and Eco as my allies. And what you do is, the champion board here is really going to be the focus of your attention in the solo game for much of the game, because you win the game if you are higher on this champion board than your rival at the end of the fourth round. You can also get kind of an ultimate victory if you're ahead of the rival and both of your allies as well, but the main goal, the main focus is to be higher on the champion board than your rival at the end of the game. And so you start in the first spot, one of your allies starts, actually I should say in the beginning spot, one of your allies starts in the first spot, your rival in the second spot, and your other ally in the third spot of the champion board. The other thing you would do as far as setup is you would go through your allies' deck and you would get rid of their shell upgrade cards, shuffle up the rest of their character cards, flip over one, the top one, place their character either standee or mini on top of it, and those are the shell upgrades, those are out, shuffle these. Okay, and you're pretty much good to go. You've got your two actions and you've got the rival's three actions. And so on a turn, this lays it out very nicely for you. The pardon me, the rival will always go first in a round, no matter what. So if you came here to Palm Plaza in the multiplayer game, you'd get the first player marker. Now you're just going to get the two fruit. You're always going to be going second in the solo game for each of the rounds. So what you do on the rival's turn is you flip over the top card of the challenge deck. And there's a couple of things you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at the corresponding island. In this case, it's Droska Ring. And you're going to be looking at what in the multiplayer game is victory points. In here, it's going to be telling you which spot they're going to go to. So you look at the Droska Ring here. You have three spots, 1, 2, and 3, starting from the top. So you would take one of the rival's action tokens, you'd place it there, and it's going to, in this case, do a corresponding action, which is, after you place the rival, if it's on the Droska Ring, you discard a market card and then refill it. It was the second place, so it removes the second market card and you refill it. Okay, so it's burning through some of those market cards, maybe things that you were hoping to get. The other thing you do is you add this challenge card to their plot column, and there are three different plot columns here: the Droska Ring, the Chronoseum, which I don't have out here, and Lamara Stadium. So this goes under the Droska Ring. The next thing you do is you check where the judge is. In this case, the judge is at Lamara Stadium. Had the judge been here at the Droska Ring, you would move the rival forward 2 spots on the champion board, which is not good for me because, again, I need to stay ahead of the rival on the champion board. In this case, the judge was not there, so the other thing you would do, the next thing you do, is take an extra challenge card. You don't do anything with it besides place it in the corresponding column, okay? So 2 of these cards have been placed. Now, you check to see if any of these plots are hatched. And this is based on a level of difficulty. I'm setting up for a normal game, so the plot threshold is 11. You count these numbers in each column and check to see if the plots have hatched, okay? In the first couple of turns, obviously it will not because you only have 2 here and 1 here. If they do hatch, bad things are going to happen. So let's just say, for example, that the Droska ring had a number of cards that had totaled 11 or more. What you're going to do is you're going to discard half the cards in that column, rounded up, and the plot strength is the number of cards you discarded, all right? +1 if you're ahead of the rival on the champion board, and then you resolve the plot effect, okay? And all of these different columns do different things. So for example, the Droska ring, you would draw one of these plot effect cards and resolve it. And none of these are things you want. So for example, here you've got knocked out. Reduce each trait except synergy by a number of notches equal to the plot strength. So if you had 2 cards discarded from there, everything other than synergy here would be moved down 2, and it could be more depending on what the plot strength is. Rigged. Search the challenge cards you just removed from the Droska ring plot to find the card that has the second highest number of trait symbols. Place that card next to your player board as the rigged challenge. You cannot attempt any other challenges until you complete that. When you complete it, discard the card and don't advance your trait. So none of these are good. You don't want any of these plot effects to happen to you. At the Chronoseum, the plot effect there is to remove monster hits equal to the plot strength. So let's say that I had already started to place some hits on this monster, on this massive hagworm over here. If the plot strength was 2, I would have to remove 2 of these hits from that monster. That's not good for me, okay? And then here at Lamara Stadium, the plot effect is to move the boat equal to the plot strength, all right? So that's a full turn of the rival. You're going to take your turn in essentially the same way you always would. You're going to place your character, do a corresponding action, and then collect some rewards for wherever you might be. All right. Now, how do your allies come into effect? Your allies come into effect is by moving up the champion board. So in this case, if I had moved up here and now I'm on the same level as Dust, I now can use Dust for 1 action. Not only that, I can use Dust's character card in addition to whatever character card or cards I might have. So it allows you to have access to more of these character cards. It allows you to have more actions than you normally would. So let's say I had done that, I could place Dust, take a corresponding action. Now when you do that, you have to move that ally up 3, 1, 2, and 3, so that you are having to kind of keep moving up to get access to them again. You would remove this card, put it to the bottom of the deck, and have a new one up. Okay, now there are also ways that you can move your rival back on the champion board, because that's something you really need to be paying close attention to, how to move up and down that champion board, not only moving you up, but moving your rival down. First of all, every time you complete a challenge, you can remove a corresponding challenge of that strength or lower from the rival's deck. So let's say, for example, I complete this Way of the Serpent challenge. On my turn, this is a strength 4 or victory point 4. I could remove this 2 from theirs, making it harder for those plots to hatch. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. Another way that I could potentially move this rival down is if I'm on the same island as my rival and I push it, which is this dotted line portion of this challenge, then the rival moves 1 back on the champion board. So that's a way that you can kind of push them back. However, there are other aspects of the game that are very difficult for you as a player to negotiate. The monsters work differently. So if the rival ever has more hits on the monster than you, and let me just quickly talk about how they go over here to the fold. Anytime that the spot that the rival is trying to go to is either blocked or a non-corresponding space, so let's say, for example, I just had a 4. Let me find one here really quickly. This works. Let's say that I had flipped this card over at the beginning of the rival's turn. This is a 4 strength on the Droska ring. There are only 3 spots. So if the rival were to draw this card, they're going to go to the lowest spot in the fold that has a monster there. And they're going to put hits on the monster equal to the round number. So in round 1, they would put 1, and they're going to start on the rightmost column at the top. So they're going to be adding hits to the monster continuously throughout the game. The way that they work is different. When the rival has more hits than you, in the multiplayer game, you only need to have 1 hit to avoid the invasion. Here, you have to have more than them. You suffer the invasion penalty, in this case, losing a die. If the monster is killed, you don't gain a reward unless you've got more hits than the monster. And if the monster flees by moving down off of this board without being killed, you move backwards 1 on the champion board. So it's a constant struggle of focusing on where you are, where your rival is, how you can get access to your allies and their abilities, having to catch up to having fewer number of turns, and dealing with the differences in the monster aspect of the game as well. You win the game, as I said, if you're higher on the champion board than your rival at the end of 4 rounds. You lose if you are not. That's the nutshell of the solo version. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview on the differences between the solo game and the multiplayer game. Just to reiterate a point, that was not a full rules overview by any means. If you want to get a better idea on how the multiplayer game plays, some more in-depth talk about the mechanics, you can look at the full four-way review that Tom, Z, Roy, and myself did. That'll give you an idea on some of the basic mechanics of the game. For the purposes of this review, I was really just trying to focus on how the solo game differed. So, first thing I like to do is talk about some solo benchmarks. These are things that I like to discuss when assessing the strengths and weaknesses of a solo game. The first thing I like to do is talk about win conditions. Is there a clear win-loss condition? Is it a beat your high score variant? Are there objectives? Things of those nature. So, the Tidal Blades solo game is a clear win-loss condition. You have a rival that you are facing and you are trying to keep ahead of them, or at least try to keep pace with them on the champion board. They begin a little bit ahead of you, and you have to really be careful about every move that you make, where you're taking your challenges, when you're going after those monsters, because it's a slightly different experience than in the multiplayer game. In the multiplayer game, you are doing the same actions, but your focus might be a little bit different. Here, it's all about that champion board. So, clear win-loss condition, a rival that you are trying to beat have a higher spot on that champion board than they are. You also have allies that if you want kind of a ultimate victory, you want to be the very highest on that champion board. So, win-loss condition is against a rival opponent. Setup and teardown is another thing I like to talk about. And this is something that I feel I do need to spend just a little bit of time on. I have only played with the deluxe edition of Tidal Blades. I can't speak to the non-deluxe edition. Now, I will tell you that the deluxe edition, component-wise, is absolutely over-the-top gorgeous. Incredible components. The art is beautiful regardless, but the components in this deluxe edition are just gorgeous. That being said, there's quite a bit of a footprint, a table footprint. It takes up a lot of space. There are a lot of components. For the solo game, there's even a bit more that you have to do as far as the setup. Getting those decks ready for your allies, making sure that you have everything where it needs to be, removing the shell upgrade card. So what I'm getting at here is that this is a game that has quite a bit of setup, and it takes a bit to put it away as well. Now, this is not a 15-20 minute filler game, so you are getting a full game experience in the time that it takes to set it up. So it's not a huge negative to me. I would consider it to be somewhat a neutral. I couldn't call it a positive because it does take a significant amount of time to get the game set up. And that can sometimes be a pretty big determining factor on whether you're going to take a game off the shelf. So just be aware, there is a significant amount of setup time and teardown time if you're playing Tidal Blades, at least in the deluxe edition. I don't get the impression it would be a tremendously amount different when you're talking about the standard version versus the deluxe edition. So something to keep in mind. I also like to talk about rules. Now, the rules in Tidal Blades are generally quite good. I actually like the way that they are organized. I like the kind of comic book styling that you have when it gives specific examples of a turn and things along those lines. There are actually two rule books. You've got the main rule book, and then you've got what's called the almanac, excuse me. The almanac is where you've got the clarifications on the worker placement spaces, where you've got clarifications on the different cards and things along those lines. It's also where the solo rules are kept. They are in a separate section towards the end of the almanac. They're very well done. I feel like they did a good job of explaining the differences between the multiplayer game and the solo game. And the biggest plus that I would say for this, for the rules, is that actual solo board. They have almost everything you need that distinguishes the solo game from the multiplayer game right there on that solo rival board. And that is fantastic. I can't tell you how much of a difference that makes. There was very few times when I had to go back to the rule book in my first game or two of solo for Tidal Blades, because almost every time I had a question, it was right there on that rival board. Now, that may be because I played it multiplayer multiple times before I played it solo, and so really I was only looking at what distinguished it, but a really good job with that rival player board. Okay, so my overall solo impression for Tidal Blades. Now, this is a game that is interesting in that the experience, the gameplay experience, is very similar in that you're taking the same actions. You're not really changing what you do as a player much at all. And the rival is also doing things that are relatively similar to what actual opponents would do. However, there is a big difference in focus I found as a solo player. I was having to focus on different aspects of the game than I did in a multiplayer game. It was a bit of an adjustment for me as a solo player after being used to the multiplayer game in changing that priority. Because in the multiplayer game, you really are just focused. You're not ignoring the champion board by any means, because there's a lot of benefits to being above that, not just in points, but in other aspects as well. But in the multiplayer game, you're really focusing more on your victory points. And in the solo game, your victory points really are not what you're looking at. You're really just looking at your place on that champion board. Now, obviously there are some analogies, if that's the correct word. There are connections between what you do to gain victory points and what you do to move up that champion board. But it is a slightly different feel. Although the experience is the same in the actions you're taking, it doesn't change the core mechanics of the game at all. The focus is different as a player. You're really having to focus on different things. However, I enjoyed that experience. I really did enjoy the solo game experience in Tidal Blades. While it is a different feel, and it took me a little bit of time to make that adjustment as a player between the types of things I tried to do in the multiplayer game versus what I tried to do in the solo game, I enjoyed both experiences. Probably my favorite aspect of the solo game in Tidal Blades is having access to those ally characters. That's a great twist, because one of my favorite parts of the game in general are the character cards. They have some really, really great abilities that can focus your strategies and make you do things that give you these great epic feeling turns. And so theoretically, having access to 3 different character, well, more than 3, because if you have multiple character cards for your main character, those are all in play. And when you use the allies, you can use your character cards and the ally character card that you have access to. And so I really enjoyed that. At first I was concerned that the rival always goes first. The rival always has one more action than you do. Well, not exactly. They don't always have one more action than you do, because if you can get those allies, those are giving you extra actions. And so I really do like that part of the solo game in Tidal Blades quite a bit. The things I liked in the multiplayer game don't get diminished at all in the solo game. Gorgeous art, gorgeous components. I really, really like the dice upgrade system. That still is very much a part of the solo game in Tidal Blades. Maybe your focus on the monsters has to be a little bit different than in the multiplayer game, but it's still a vitally important part of the game. And so it's one of those games where you feel like there's a lot of things you want to do and you don't have enough time to do it. And it's nice that that tension is still there in the solo game. The downsides are potentially, again, the amount of time it takes to set it up, the large footprint that it has there. There's really not a lot of administration that takes place on the Rivals turn. That's not a huge deal. It is a little bit sometimes fiddly to kind of deal with the plot cards and removing the correct number of plot cards, figuring out the plot strength, but that's a minor quibble. Overall, I feel like the solo game for Tidal Blades is really solid, a quite good one, and one that I recommend. For that reason, I'm going to give the solo variant for Tidal Blades an 8 out of 10 and a seal of approval. If you like it as a multiplayer game, you absolutely should try it out as a solo game. If you are interested in getting it as just a solo game, I do feel like you're going to get a really solid solo gaming experience. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.